Grafton flicked a switch on the console, the hiss of static loud enough to make his ears complain. "If only my ex-wife could stay this quiet," he muttered, tapping the console like a mechanic pretending to know what he's doing. The Deep Space Listening Post was a monument to human ingenuity in the same way a leaky boat is a testament to shipbuilding. Somewhere out there in the inky void, galaxies spun secrets, and Grafton's job was to catch their whispers. Not that they'd ever bothered to whisper anything interesting. The station was a floating tin can with personality issues, orbiting a planet no one cared about. It was the kind of place where dreams came to die, along with your social life and any hope of a promotion. "It's like a retirement home for ambition," Grafton liked to say, usually to the delight of no one. Leora sat at her station, legs propped up on the console, staring at the monitor with the intensity of someone trying not to fall asleep. "Got anything, Graft?" she asked, not looking up. "Or are we still listening to the cosmic equivalent of elevator music?" Grafton smirked. "Oh, just the usual. A symphony of nothing. Might as well be listening to my grandma's cooking recipes on repeat," Leora chuckled. "Hey, at least they won't kill us. Unlike her meatloaf." The station shuddered, a familiar complaint of old machinery. The budget cuts had been so deep they might as well have been delivered with a chainsaw. "You think the higher-ups will finally give us proper funding if we actually find something?" "Only if we promise not to spend it on coffee and better chairs," Leora replied, adjusting her headset. "You know how they hate us being comfortable." The console suddenly sparked to life, a series of erratic beeps slicing through the usual monotony. Grafton frowned, leaning forward. "That's new. Or it's just another bloody glitch." "Glitch or not," Leora said, pushing herself upright, "it's the most interesting thing to happen in the past month." Grafton flicked a few more switches, their feeble clicks lost in the sea of static. The signal was odd, a pattern almost musical in its structure, not unlike a drunk trying to sing a lullaby. "This isn't local," he said, more to himself than Leora. "Too far out, too structured." "Alien radio," Leora suggested, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do they want to know our favorite recipes too? More likely they're trying to sell us some intergalactic insurance," Grafton replied, squinting at the screen. "But seriously, this isn't normal." The signal pulsed again, and Leora's fingers danced across her console, pulling up data streams and charts. "You know, if this is real, like really real, we might actually have to do some work," Grafton groaned. "God forbid we break a sweat, but you're right. Whatever this is, we're about to find out if aliens have a sense of humor." Leora leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowed. "It's repeating, every 30 seconds. A distress call, or maybe just a prank signal sent by some bored alien teenager," Grafton suggested. "Hey Dad, watch me mess with the humans," Leora snorted. "Let's hope it doesn't end with us getting grounded, or worse, vaporized." The station gave another half-hearted shudder, and Grafton wondered if the structure could handle the weight of the mystery. "We should probably report this, right?" "To who?" Leora asked, gesturing around the empty station. "The janitor, HQ," Grafton replied, starting the tedious task of composing a message that wouldn't immediately get them laughed out of the galaxy. "Assuming they still remember we exist out here," Leora groaned, mimicking the station's own protests. "Well, make it sound exciting. Throw in a few exclamation marks. Maybe a threatening alien armada or two." "I'll see what I can do," Grafton said, already typing. "Urgent possible alien invasion. P.S. Please send snacks," Leora chuckled. "Snacks and a rescue team, preferably in that order." The console blinked again, the signal growing more insistent, like a dog whining for attention. "Seriously though," Grafton said, pausing his typing, "if this is an invasion, they've picked the worst first contact team in history." Leora shrugged. "Hey, maybe they're terrible at invasions." "One can hope," Grafton muttered, hitting send. "Message away. Now we wait and see if anyone cares." They sat in silence, the hum of the station the only accompaniment to their thoughts. Grafton couldn't help but wonder if this was what all those years of training were for, to sit in a metal box and hope someone out there was as bored as he was. "You know," Leora said, breaking the silence, If this is the beginning of an invasion, at least it'll be a change of pace. Grafton nodded, trying to find the silver lining in the cosmic cloud. Yeah, nothing like impending doom to spice up the work week. The console beeped again, the signal unwavering in its persistence. Think they'll respond? Grafton asked, more out of habit than expectation. To us, Leora replied, shaking her head. Not unless we attach a bribe. Well, Grafton said, leaning back in his chair, here's to hoping the universe has a sense of humor as twisted as yours. The signal pulsed one last time and the console's lights flickered ominously. Grafton and Leora exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever was coming, they'd face it like they faced everything else, with sarcasm, snacks, and a healthy dose of skepticism. The station's lights dimmed slightly as if it too was trying to build suspense. You know, Leora said, this might actually be fun. Grafton raised an eyebrow. Speak for yourself. I've got a date with Destiny in a very comfortable chair. Destiny or doom, Leora quipped. At this point, does it really matter? Grafton replied with a grin as the console started to beep again, its insistent tone like a child demanding attention. Leora sighed, fingers flying over her keyboard. Well, looks like we're about to find out, she said, as the console's screen filled with an array of data almost as incomprehensible as the station's maintenance manual. Grafton squinted at the screen. Is that a map? Could be, Leora replied, tilting her head like someone trying to solve a particularly tricky puzzle. Or it's just what happens when you let a cat walk across the keyboard. If it's a map, it's the worst one I've ever seen, Grafton said, scratching his head. But then again, I've never been good with directions. Maybe it's the aliens' idea of a joke, Leora suggested, her tone as dry as the station's air supply. Hey, let's send the humans a puzzle they can't solve. Well, joke's on them, Grafton replied. I've got no intention of solving anything before my third cup of coffee. Leora chuckled, scanning the data for anything that resembled a clue. You think if they do invade, they'll bring decent coffee? One can dream, Grafton said, trying to make sense of the chaotic display. Or maybe they're just here to steal our secret coffee recipes. If that's the case, they are in for a disappointment, Leora said, glancing at the stale instant coffee on the counter. I've tasted better dirt. The console's incessant beeping seemed to reach a crescendo, as if the station itself was getting impatient. All right, Grafton muttered, pressing buttons at random. Let's see what happens if we poke it. The screen flickered, displaying a series of coordinates that seemed to pulse in time with the signal. Looks like a location, Leora observed, her voice tinged with curiosity. Grafton nodded. Coordinates for what, though? A rendezvous, a trap, a cosmic yard sale. Only one way to find out, Leora said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and dread. Plot a course, Grafton instructed, leaning back and folding his arms. Let's see where this rabbit hole leads. Leora's fingers danced over the controls, the station responding with a shudder that felt almost eager. Course plotted, she confirmed, her smile both grim and eager. Here's to hoping we've got something more exciting than another asteroid field. Grafton chuckled, feeling the familiar twitch of anticipation. Or at the very least, more than some alien kid's science project. The station's engines hummed to life, propelling them toward the unknown with a grace that belied its ramshackle appearance. Guess we're about to find out if aliens enjoy a good laugh, Leora said, her gaze fixed on the screen. Either way, Grafton replied, settling into his seat, we're in for one hell of a ride. The console's incessant beeping could drive a saint to sin, and Grafton wasn't even a practicing sinner. He muttered under his breath as he punched keys on the aging terminal, which responded with all the enthusiasm of a teenager being asked to do chores. Leora leaned over his shoulder, peering at the jumble of numbers and symbols that could either be the secret to the universe or the result of an interstellar cat's nap on a keyboard. So have you cracked the code yet, or are we still waiting for divine intervention? Divine intervention's on backorder just like our funding, Grafton replied, squinting at the screen. But I think I've got something. These coordinates, they're not just random squiggles. You mean the universe hasn't decided to play cosmic Pictionary with us? Leora asked with mock surprise. Nope, Grafton tapped the screen. These numbers match up with known star maps. It's pointing to a specific region in the galaxy, and not just any region, a busy one. Busy how? Leora crossed her arms, looking less like a scientist and more like a disgruntled patron waiting for their drink. Busy as in, oh look, a fleet of unidentified objects heading our way busy, Grafton said, letting the words hang like smoke in the air. Leora's eyebrows shot up. Are you telling me we've just stumbled into the plot of an old sci-fi movie? Please tell me they brought popcorn. If by popcorn you mean weapons capable of turning our cozy listening post into space dust, then yes, Grafton replied, trying to sound nonchalant but failing miserably. Just then the console let out a pitiful whine, like a dog realizing it wasn't getting any table scraps. The screen flickered, going dark for a moment before grudgingly sparking back to life. Did the console just give up on life? Leora asked, smacking it with the palm of her hand. Can't blame it, Grafton said, watching as the screen hesitantly displayed the data again. But no, it's just another glitch. At least I hope it is. Add console repair to the list along with notify Earth of impending doom, Leora said, her tone dripping with irony. Assuming, of course, that our messages even get through. Yeah, about that, Grafton said, punching the console keys as if brute force would make them work better. I sent the urgent message. You know, possible alien invasion, P.S. Send snacks. And, Leora prompted, though she looked like she already knew the answer. And the damn thing stuck in the outbox, like a paper airplane that can't quite catch the breeze. Perfect, Leora said, rolling her eyes with an exasperation only years of dealing with bureaucratic ineptitude could inspire. So we're stuck out here, possibly about to be the opening act for an alien invasion, and we can't even get a message to HQ. Pretty much, Grafton replied. But hey, at least we're consistent. And they say nobody listens to us out here, Leora said with a wave of her hand. Turns out not even the machines do. Grafton set to work, fingers flying over the console with a practiced efficiency that belied his usual apathy. The old machine wheezed and groaned, its protests falling on deaf ears. I'm rerouting through the secondary backup. Maybe we can bypass the main server issues. Not that HQ will do more than send us a we'll look into it response. If they even bother to read it, Leora countered, they'll probably assume we're just looking for attention. Attention or a decent budget, Grafton said, as he tried to coax the console into compliance. Either would be nice. Leora leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if expecting divine inspiration to come from above. So, what do we do if they actually reach us before anyone down on Earth decides to care? Grafton shrugged, feigning nonchalance. Worst case, we improvise. Best case, we resign before anyone can blame us. Great options, Leora said dryly. I'll start drafting my resignation letter now. The console let out a chime, a sound that would have been cheerful if it weren't for the context. The message finally sent, a small victory in a day filled with potential catastrophes. Message away, Grafton announced, looking more relieved than he'd like to admit. Now we just have to sit back and wait for the cavalry, which I'm sure will arrive just in time to pick through our remains, Leora said, her sarcasm as sharp as ever. They settled into an uneasy silence, the weight of their situation pressing down like the artificial gravity of the station. The console beeped again, its messages more insistent, a digital harbinger of doom. Grafton checked the readings, his expression growing grimmer with each passing second. Looks like they're picking up speed. Fantastic, Leora muttered. Here I was worried we might have a slow day. At least we won't die of boredom, Grafton quipped, trying to lighten the mood. But the joke fell flat, the tension too thick to be pierced by humor alone. So what's the plan, Captain? Leora asked, her voice a mix of sarcasm and genuine curiosity. Grafton scratched his chin, his mind racing through the limited options at their disposal. We keep monitoring, try to get more intel. Worst case, we pull a Houdini and disappear. Escape pods, Leora queried, arching an eyebrow. Wouldn't trust them to keep us alive long enough to enjoy the view, Grafton replied, shaking his head. But better than nothing, I suppose. Nothing is about the only thing we have in abundance, Leora said, glancing around the cramped station. Well, that and sarcasm. And aliens, apparently, Grafton added, his gaze fixed on the console's ominous display. The station shuddered again, a reminder of its fragile state. You think it's just the old girl complaining, Leora asked, or is it something else? Grafton hesitated, then shrugged. Does it matter? Either way, we're screwed. Leora chuckled darkly. Always the optimist. The console beeped insistently, drawing their attention back to the screen. Incoming transmission, Grafton noted, more surprised than he cared to admit. From HQ, Leora asked, skepticism coloring her voice. No, Grafton said, eyes narrowing. Not HQ, it's from the fleet. Leora leaned in, her expression a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. The aliens. What do they want? Grafton clicked on the message, the screen filling with symbols and patterns that were as alien as the senders. Looks like they're trying to communicate, he said, unable to hide his surprise. Really? Leora asked, peering at the screen. Any idea what it says? Not a clue, Grafton admitted. But it looks like some sort of query. Maybe they're asking for directions. To where? The nearest fast food joint, Leora joked, though she couldn't hide the tension in her voice. Who knows? Grafton replied, trying to decipher the symbols. Could be a friendly greeting, could be a declaration of war. Let's hope it's not the latter, Leora said, crossing her fingers for good measure. Yeah, 'cause that would really ruin our day, Grafton said, chuckling despite himself. The tension in the room was palpable, the humor a thin veneer over a well of anxiety. They both knew that whatever was coming, it was beyond their control. But that didn't mean they were going to go quietly. Maybe we should send a reply, Leora suggested, her voice carrying a hint of defiance. Something friendly, or at least less hostile than our usual messages to HQ, Grafton grinned, a plan forming in his mind. How about this? Dear aliens, please bring coffee. Have a nice day. Leora laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the tense silence. Sure, why not? At least we'll go down in history as the most polite victims. Or the most sarcastic, Grafton countered, fingers flying over the keyboard as he composed the message. They waited, the seconds stretching into eternity. The station's hum was their only companion, a constant reminder of their isolation. Finally, the console beeped again, a response from the fleet. The symbols rearranged themselves on the screen, forming patterns that were almost recognizable. What does it say? Leora asked, leaning closer. Grafton stared at the screen, his eyes widening in disbelief. I think they just asked us to surrender. Oh, is that all? Leora replied with a bemused smile. And here I thought they wanted our coffee recipes. Maybe both, Grafton said, shaking his head. Do we even have a white flag to wave? Not unless you count the cleaning rags, Leora said, smirking. Guess we'll have to get creative, Grafton replied, trying to keep his voice light despite the gravity of the situation. They sat in silence, the console's screen still displaying the alien message. The reality of their predicament was beginning to sink in, the humor fading under the weight of impending doom. Well, Leora said, breaking the silence, at least we gave it a shot. That we did, Grafton agreed, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. The console beeped once more, a final message from the fleet. The symbols shifted, forming a new pattern that was both ominous and intriguing. What now? Leora asked, her curiosity piqued. Grafton studied the screen, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Looks like they're inviting us to dinner. Leora raised an eyebrow. Dinner or dissection? At this point, what's the difference? Grafton quipped, his humor masking the dread beneath. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together, armed with nothing but sarcasm and a stubborn refusal to go quietly. The station shuddered again, the lights flickering as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And for a moment, Grafton could almost believe that everything would be all right. Almost. Grafton stared at the console, a relic of engineering that had seen better days, probably when disco was still in vogue. "This thing's about as reliable as a politician's promise," he muttered, smacking it once for good measure. "Hey, don't insult it. It's our only lifeline to Earth, not that they'd notice if we went quiet," Leora replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Her fingers danced over the keys, trying desperately to interpret the alien message while the console flickered in and out of coherence like a drunk uncle at a wedding. Grafton pondered their next move, scratching his chin with the kind of focus usually reserved for chess or untangling Christmas lights. "All right, here's a thought. We've got a bunch of outdated tech lying around, right? What if we jury-rig it to boost our signal?" "Jury-rig?" Leora echoed, raising an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously like work, Grafton." "Yeah, I know. But if it keeps us from being alien hors d'oeuvres, I'm willing to break a sweat," Grafton shot back, already rummaging through a pile of old cables and defunct gadgets. The station had more spare parts than a hoarder's garage sale. "What are you thinking?" Leora asked, reluctantly intrigued despite herself. "I'm thinking," Grafton said, holding up something that might have been a part of a toaster at some point, "we could cobble together an improved transmitter. Boost the signal, get HQ to hear us over the cosmic equivalent of elevator music." "Right. And I'll just decipher the alien intentions using my psychic powers," Leora quipped, rolling her eyes. But she started sifting through the pile of tech junk anyway, because at the end of the universe, why not try? They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the hum of the station and the occasional grumble from the console. It wasn't exactly NASA level, but it was the best they had. "So, assuming we get this thing working," Leora said, untangling wires with the precision of a cat's cradle champion, "what about our new friends out there? Any more updates on their dinner plans?" "Nothing yet," Grafton replied, focusing on connecting the wires in a way that wouldn't result in an impromptu fireworks display. "For all we know, they're debating whether we're an appetizer or the main course. What I wouldn't give for translator right now," Leora sighed, glancing at the screen filled with alien hieroglyphics. "Hell, I'd settle for a Rosetta Stone," Grafton chuckled. "Maybe they're just lonely, looking for a pen pal. If that's the case, they're going to be disappointed," Leora said, snapping two wires together with a spark. "We're not exactly Hallmark material." "True," Grafton agreed, testing the connections with an old multimeter. "But hey, if we get this working, maybe we can send them a mixtape. Everyone loves a good mixtape, sure. A little ABBA, some Queen. Maybe they'll dance their way back home," Leora replied, smirking at the absurdity of it all. The Iors dragged on, their efforts a patchwork quilt of desperation and ingenuity. Grafton's plan was simple: amplify their signal using whatever odds and ends they could scrounge together, pray it reached someone with a pulse back on Earth, and hope the aliens were more interested in first contact than first course. Leora finally managed to decipher a bit more of the alien message, her eyes narrowing as she pieced it together like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. "You know, I think they're asking about resources. Fuel, maybe." "Well, that's a relief," Grafton said, adjusting a knob on their makeshift transmitter. "At least if they kill us, it won't be for takeout." "Optimism, thy name is Grafton," Leora said, shaking her head. "So how do we reply?" "Sorry," fresh out of everything except sarcasm and anxiety. "Precisely," he said, grinning. "But seriously, we send a friendly hi there, please don't eat us message, and see what they do." The console finally whirred to life, their Frankenstein transmitter humming along like an off-key kazoo. Grafton pressed a button, sending their message into the void. "There goes nothing. Or everything, depending on how you look at it. Think they'll respond?" Leora asked, half hopeful, half resigned. "I'd say it's 50-50, Grafton replied, leaning back and stretching his arms. "Either they'll get the message, or our console will implode and take us with it." The station creaked ominously, as if considering the latter option. "And if they do respond?" Leora prompted. "We play it by ear," Grafton said with a shrug. "I mean, what's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words, Leora muttered, but she couldn't help the wry smile that tugged at her lips. The minutes ticked by, each one a small eternity in the cramped confines of the station. Their makeshift transmitter buzzed softly, a hopeful, if slightly inept, bridge across the vast gulf of space. And then the console beeped, its display flickering to life with a new message. Leora's eyes widened. Looks like they're responding. Grafton leaned forward, his heart thudding in his chest like a malfunctioning engine. What's it say? Leora squinted at the symbols. Something about sharing resources. Maybe they want to trade. Grafton repeated, incredulous. What could we possibly have that they'd want? Coffee. Leora suggested, though she knew it was more wishful thinking than reality. Hell, maybe we should just offer them the station, Grafton said, half joking. They'd probably do a better job running it than us. The alien message continued to unravel, revealing snippets of information that were both tantalizing and terrifying. Leora tapped the console, her brow furrowed in concentration. I think they are offering some kind of alliance. An alliance? Grafton echoed, his skepticism palpable. With us. Did they forget to read our resume? Apparently they're desperate, Leora said dryly. Or maybe they just have a thing for lost causes. Grafton laughed, a short bark of sound that echoed in the empty station. Well, that's a first. They shared a look, a silent understanding passing between them. The universe was vast, cold, and indifferent, but here they were, two insignificant humans standing on the precipice of something extraordinary, or maybe just extraordinarily dangerous. So we accept. Leora asked, her fingers hovering over the console's keys. What's the harm? Grafton said with a shrug. Worst case, we irritate them and they blow us to smithereens. Best case, we make history. Both seem equally appealing, Leora said with a wry grin. Grafton nodded, his decision made. Let's roll the dice. Leora typed a response, her fingers flying over the keys with a confidence that belied the uncertainty of their situation. The message sent, their fate now entwined with the aliens in a way that neither could have anticipated. Now we wait, Grafton said, settling back into his chair. And hope they don't have a taste for sarcasm, Leora added, her eyes glued to the console. The station hummed around them, its creaks and groans a familiar symphony of impending disaster. And yet in the midst of it all there was a sense of possibility, a flicker of hope that cut through the grim darkness of space. Think we'll get medals for this? Leora asked, half serious. Medals? Grafton snorted. We're more likely to get a bill for damages. Yeah, but wouldn't it be nice? Grafton chuckled, the sound mingling with the gentle hum of the station. Sure. A nice shiny medal to hang on my non-existent mantle. They fell into a companionable silence, the weight of their decision settling over them like a heavy blanket. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together, armed with nothing but their wits, a smattering of old technology, and enough sarcasm to fill a black hole. And as the console beeped with yet another incoming message, they both leaned forward, ready to meet whatever came next with a determination that was almost, but not quite, heroic. Well, Grafton said, a grin tugging at his lips, let's see what the universe has in store for us. With any luck, it'd involve coffee. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of hope. The Deep Space Listening Post shuddered violently, the suddenness of the impact sending Grafton sprawling off his chair and into a tangle of cables that not even Houdini could escape. The lights flickered ominously, casting ghostly shadows across the cramped space. Leora, somehow still seated despite the station's sudden impersonation of a bucking bronco, clung to the console as if it were a life raft. What the hell was that? She yelled over the din of alarms that had sprung to life like an overly enthusiastic marching band. Grafton extricated himself from the cables, his expression a mix of confusion and annoyance. I think, he grunted, we just got a wake-up call from our alien pen pals. Well, that's just splendid, Leora muttered, punching buttons on the console with the kind of ferocity usually reserved for a final boss battle in a video game. 1 minute they're all let's be friends, and the next they're rattling our cage. The station lurched again, as if in answer, metal groaning under the strain. Both Grafton and Leora shared a look that spoke volumes, mostly about how much they regretted not choosing a career that involved fewer existential threats. "Status report, Grafton," Leora barked, trying to sound authoritative despite the rising panic in her voice. "Status? We're screwed," Grafton replied, as dry as a desert. He tapped a few buttons on his handheld device, trying to get a read on the situation. "Looks like they hit us with some kind of EMP. Our systems are fried, communications are down, and if I'm reading this right, we're drifting." "Fantastic," Leora said, rolling her eyes. "So much for sending our mixtape." "I guess they hated ABBA. Clearly not fans of Dancing Queen," Grafton agreed, pushing himself to his feet. "We need to get control back, or we're going to end up like a cosmic pinball." The station continued its slow tumble through space, leaving them with a queasy sense of weightlessness that was as disorienting as it was terrifying. The only thing that remained constant were the alarms, blaring insistently as if determined to remind them of just how dire their situation was. "So, options?" Leora asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "Option 1. We sit here, do nothing, and hope a miracle happens," Grafton said, ticking off his fingers. "Option 2. We try to fix this mess before we crash into something or run out of air." Option 1 sounds awfully tempting, Leora quipped, but she was already digging through the pile of spare parts for something useful. "Yeah, but I've got a thing against asphyxiation," Grafton replied, rummaging alongside her. "Call me old-fashioned." The station's automated systems were down, leaving them with little more than hopes and prayers, and neither of them were particularly religious. Grafton grabbed a soldering iron, its tip glowing like a tiny, molten sun. "We'll need to reroute power manually," he said, working quickly, his hands a blur of motion. "If we can at least get basic systems running, we might have a shot at regaining control." "And how do we do that?" Leora asked, peering over his shoulder. "Very carefully," Grafton replied, flashing her a grin that was more bravado than confidence. Working together, they managed to jury-rig a solution that would make any self-respecting engineer weep. Wires crisscrossed like a spiderweb, and Grafton was pretty sure that half the components they used were technically illegal. But it was a solution, and in moments like this, legality was a minor concern. "All right, I'm going to flip the switch," Grafton said, pausing long enough to take a deep breath. "If this works, we'll have basic power. If it doesn't, well." "Nice knowing you." Way to inspire confidence, Leora deadpan, bracing herself. With a flick of the switch, the station stuttered back to life, lights flickering in a hesitant symphony before settling into a steady glow. The alarms cut out, leaving behind a blissful silence that was almost unsettling in its abruptness. "Ha!" Grafton crowed, punching the air in victory. "Take that, entropy. Don't get cocky," Leora warned, though she was smiling. "We've still got work to do." Together, they managed to stabilize the station's trajectory, stopping the spin that had threatened to turn them into human paint splatters. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but they'd bought themselves some breathing room. "Okay, so we're not about to become space debris," Leora said, checking the readings. "But we're still cut off. No comms, no way to warn Earth about our new friends." "Yeah, that's a problem," Grafton agreed, leaning back against the console. "I guess the aliens aren't big on sharing. Or maybe they're just shy," Leora suggested, casting a glance at the monitor. "Either way, we need to find a way to boost our signal. If they're targeting listening posts, Earth's going to be flying blind." "Which means they're planning something big," Grafton said, his mind racing. "We need to get a message out before they make their move." "Great. So how do we become the most annoying signal in the galaxy?" "With style," Grafton said, grinning like a man who had just figured out how to cheat death. "And a little bit of luck." They tore into the pile of junk again, scavenging for anything that might help them boost the signal. It was a scene straight out of a mad scientist's lab, with parts strewn everywhere and the scent of burnt circuits hanging in the air like a cheap cologne. "Hey, do you think they'll negotiate if we offer them your collection of terrible jokes?" Leora asked, smirking as she attached a power cell to their new contraption. "Huh, Trust me, if my jokes could kill, we'd have won this war already, Grafton shot back. With their makeshift transmitter assembled, they stood back to admire their handiwork. It looked like something a toddler might build out of Lego, but it was their best shot. And really, at this point, what did they have to lose? All right, here goes nothing, Leora said, crossing her fingers. Grafton fired up the transmitter, sending a powerful signal shooting through the void like a beacon of defiance. He could only hope it would reach someone on Earth before it was too late. The console crackled to life, the display filled with static and garbled messages. But there, amidst the chaos, was a sliver of hope, a faint response from HQ. It buzzed across the screen, disjointed but undeniably there. "They got us," Leora breathed, relief washing over her. "They did?" Grafton asked, blinking at the screen. "Well, I'll be damned. Their message was out, their warning sent. It was a small victory, but a vital one." The aliens might have thrown the first punch, but Grafton and Leora weren't down for the count just yet. "So what's next?" Leora asked, her gaze fixed on the console. "Now," Grafton said, feeling the adrenaline rush dissipate, leaving him exhausted but hopeful. "We sit tight and wait for Earth to respond. Hopefully they bring a big enough stick to the party. And in the meantime, we pray the aliens have the attention span of a goldfish," Grafton said, grinning despite himself. "And maybe figure out how to get the coffee machine working again." "Priorities," Leora agreed, laughing softly. "You always did have them straight." The station drifted through the silent void, a solitary outpost in the vast expanse of space. The threat of alien aggression loomed large, a shadow that stretched across the cosmos. But for now they had done all they could. "Think we'll survive this?" Leora asked, her voice quiet but steady. "Survive?" Grafton echoed, considering the question. "Maybe, but if not, at least we went down swinging." "Spoken like a true hero," Leora said, smirking. Grafton snorted. "Hero? Nah. Just a guy who hates quitting." Together they settled into the silence, waiting for dawn in a universe that rarely saw it. The future was uncertain, the threat real and looming. But for Grafton and Leora there was always hope. And if that didn't work, well, they'd make do with sarcasm and caffeine. As the station continued its slow journey through the void, they remained vigilant, ready to face whatever came next. After all, in a universe full of darkness, sometimes you had to be your own light. Space. It's not your friend. It's the kind of place where even a simple whisper in the wrong frequency can vaporize your hopes and dreams. Not that Grafton and Leora had many dreams left at this point. They were more focused on survival, like cockroaches, but with less charm. Supplies were dwindling like their patience for another round of guess what broke today. And the station was colder than an ex's glare on a bad breakup night. Grafton rummaged through a drawer that seemed to contain the entire universe's supply of useless junk. "Leora, I swear this place is a galactic junkyard masquerading as a listening post." Leora was hunched over the console, staring at the screen with the kind of intensity usually reserved for eyeing an approaching asteroid. "If you find a way to turn this mess into gold, let me know." "We could use a bit of alchemy." "Alchemy's a bit above my pay grade," Grafton replied, tossing a particularly suspect-looking bolt over his shoulder. "Right now, I'd settle for a sandwich that doesn't taste like cardboard." "Cardboard's luxury compared to what's left," Leora shot back, rubbing her temples. The caffeine reserves had run dry days ago, and caffeine withdrawal wasn't pretty on anyone, even in zero gravity. Grafton paused, a small, ancient-looking radio in hand. "What's this relic doing here? Didn't know we were in a museum." "Hey, maybe it's an antique from when people actually gave a damn about funding space exploration," Leora suggested, the sarcasm dripping like a leaky airlock. "Try not to break it. Might be worth something to the right sucker." Grafton twisted a few knobs and was rewarded with static that scratched at their ears like an over-enthusiastic cat. "Wow, state-of-the-art white noise. Just what we need." "Turn it down before it summons a black hole," Leora yelled, hands over her ears. "Unless you want to see what the inside of one looks like," he obliged, reducing the grating static to a manageable whisper. You know, I bet the aliens are probably having a good laugh watching us flail around. Yeah, I bet they're sitting back with popcorn made of stardust, Leora agreed. Wonder if they've got a side bet on whether we accidentally blow ourselves up. The station's dwindling supplies had them on edge, and the ever-present threat of alien aggression was like a shadow on a moonless night, always there, looming, waiting. So what's the plan? Leora asked, though she knew the answer would be as comforting as a bed of nails. Grafton sighed, massaging his temples. Plan. Right now our plan has more holes than Swiss cheese. We've sent out our distress call and now we wait for Earth's response, which might be a while, considering they think $20 is a suitable annual budget for space defense. Great. We're screwed, Leora muttered, tapping at the console. Hey, don't be such a pessimist, Grafton said with mock enthusiasm. We might get lucky and uncover the galaxy's best-kept secret, or we'll die horribly. Either way, no more taxes. Their humor was as dark as their prospects, but it kept them going, barely. As long as they kept laughing, they weren't completely defeated. Grafton fiddled with the radio, cycling through frequencies with the aimless curiosity of a bored child. Might as well see if I can pick up anything useful, he said, though they both knew the odds were astronomical. He spun the dial, and the static shifted, a background hum emerging that was different, not the usual cosmic white noise. It was almost musical, a rhythm that pulls through the airwaves like an unseen heartbeat. That's strange, Grafton muttered, adjusting the knob with the precision of a man defusing a bomb. Leora looked up, her interest piqued. What did you find? More noise? Maybe, Grafton said, squinting at the handheld device. But it's not just noise, it's got a pattern, almost like a signal. You think it's from the aliens? Leora asked, her tone tinged with both hope and dread. Grafton shrugged. Could be. Or it's just the universe playing tricks on us. But I'll be damned if I don't check it out. As he tuned in further, the frequency seemed to modulate, and the lights in the station flickered as if reacting to an unseen force. The station trembled, a gentle vibration that resonated through the metal walls like a giant tuning fork. Now you've done it, Leora said, though her voice held more curiosity than accusation. You've pissed off the station ghost. Or maybe I just stumbled onto something important, Grafton replied, focusing intently on the readings. This might be the thing that's been keeping our alien friends coordinated. If we can figure out how to disrupt it, we could finally have the upper hand, Leora finished, her eyes lighting up with a spark of hope that had been missing for far too long. Grafton grinned, the adrenaline kicking in. Looks like we might get to annoy them as much as they've annoyed us. Leora chuckled, though the sound was more of a grim determination than genuine amusement. And here I thought today was just going to be another day of trying not to die. The mood in the station lifted, if only slightly. The realization that they might have a chance, no matter how slim, breathed new life into their weary souls. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fuel their resolve. All right, Leora said, rolling up her sleeves like a general preparing for battle. Let's see what we can do with this. We might not be able to take the fight to them, but we can sure as hell make them regret giving us a hard time. With renewed energy, they set to work analyzing the signal, trying to piece together how it functioned and, more importantly, how they could disrupt it. It was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle in the middle of a tornado, but they were determined. Okay, Grafton said after hours of tinkering and swearing. I think if we can broadcast on this frequency, we might be able to throw a wrench in their works. Won't they detect it? Leora asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Probably, Grafton admitted. But if we time it right, we could buy Earth enough time to get their act together. Leora nodded, understanding the risk but knowing it was their best shot. And if we're wrong, Grafton smirked, though it was more bravado than confidence. Then we find out what alien detention looks like, but hey, at least we'll have a story to tell. Assuming we're not turned into space dust first, Leora quipped, shaking her head. Optimist, Grafton replied, grinning as he prepared the transmitter. The station's atmosphere was tense, a charged silence that buzzed with unspoken fears and unvoiced hopes. They both knew the stakes. Failure meant extinction, success meant survival. There wasn't much room for error, but that's what made the possibility of victory so sweet. "Here goes nothing," Grafton said, his hand poised over the transmitter's execute button. "Wait," Leora said, grabbing his arm. "Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." Grafton looked at her, seeing the determination etched in her features. "You're right. Let's double-check everything." They ran through the setup one last time, ensuring the makeshift array was tuned correctly. Every wire was checked, every connection verified. It was the most meticulous work they'd ever done, and they did it with the precision of surgeons, albeit ones who might be slightly drunk on adrenaline. "Okay, now I'm ready," Leora declared, her voice steady. "All right then," Grafton said, taking a deep breath. "Let's give them a taste of their own medicine." He hit the button, and the station shuddered as the transmission went live, blasting out into the void like a scream of defiance. The lights flickered, the hum intensified, and for a moment they held their breath, waiting for some sign of success or failure. Nothing happened. "Well, that was anticlimactic," Leora said, her shoulders slumping. "Give it a minute," Grafton replied, refusing to let disappointment settle in. Then slowly the station began to stabilize, the vibrations easing until they vanished altogether. The console lit up with data, charts and graphs filling the screen with a chaotic symphony of information. "It's working," Leora exclaimed, disbelief and excitement mingling in her voice. Grafton let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Ha, take that, you space bastards." They watched as the signal continued to broadcast, disrupting whatever coordination the aliens had been using. It was a small victory, but one that tipped the scales ever so slightly in humanity's favor. "So what do we do now?" Leora asked, the relief evident in her expression. "Now we wait," Grafton said, settling into his chair with a weary satisfaction, "and hope our little stunt buys Earth enough time to come up with something bigger." "Let's just hope they're faster than their usual bureaucratic crawl," Leora replied, shaking her head. The station was quiet, the calm after the storm, and for the first time in a long time they felt like they had a fighting chance. The odds were still against them, but that was nothing new. They'd faced impossible situations before and come out the other side, though perhaps a little worse for wear. "So," Grafton said, glancing at Leora, "think we'll get a commendation for this? If by commendation you mean a stern talking to for breaking protocol, then sure," Leora replied, laughing. "Not to mention all the paperwork," Grafton added, grimacing at the thought. "Paperwork can wait," Leora said, leaning back with a sigh. "Right now, I'm just going to enjoy the fact that we might have actually done something right for once." They sat in silence, watching the stars drift past, knowing full well that the battle was far from over. But for now, they had a small victory to savor, a moment of triumph in a universe that rarely allowed it. "Here's to not dying today," Grafton said, raising an imaginary glass. "I'll drink to that," Leora agreed, her smile genuine for the first time in what felt like forever. Together, they faced the unknown with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. And in the vast, uncaring expanse of space, that was no small feat. Grafton leaned back in his seat, trying to ignore the ache in his shoulders that had become as much a part of him as his sarcasm. "Well, at least we know the lights work," he said, nodding at the flickering bulbs that bathed their little chunk of nowhere in a sickly yellow glow. "Always nice to have a reminder that our budget barely covers dim lighting." Leora, her fingers flying over the console like a pianist on a caffeine high, didn't bother looking up. "Better than nothing," she muttered, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "I'm still amazed this place hasn't collapsed into a pile of space junk." "Give it time," Grafton replied, a grin playing at the edges of his mouth. "I'm sure it's working on it." They both knew that every creak and groan of the station was a testament to its impending doom, a sort of cosmic mockery of their situation. But for now, they were alive. Sometimes that felt like winning the universe's most rigged lottery. "So," Leora said, pausing long enough to give him a sidelong glance. What exactly did we accomplish by broadcasting that signal? Aside from potentially painting a giant target on our backs. Ah, you know, Grafton said, waving a hand airily, just giving the aliens a little taste of their own medicine, making them question whether we're the galaxy's most devious strategists or just really, really lucky. Leora snorted. I'd bet on the latter. Hey, luck counts as a strategy, Grafton shot back, leaning forward with a conspiratorial grin. And if we're lucky enough, maybe Earth will get off its collective backside and actually do something useful. Like send us a pizza, Leora suggested, half joking, half hopeful. Or at least more instant noodles, Grafton countered. Though I'm pretty sure we've single-handedly depleted the galaxy's supply. Their banter was a poor substitute for an actual meal, but it beat staring into the void waiting for salvation, or annihilation. They were well aware that the line between the two was razor-thin, and balanced precariously on a system that had more patches than a pirate's eye collection. So what's next? Grafton asked, the levity in his voice unable to mask the underlying tension. Leora shrugged, her eyes glued to the console's flickering screen. We keep fiddling with the signal, see if we can confuse them some more. Make them think we're doing something incredibly brilliant when really we're just winging it. Sounds like a plan, Grafton said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Or at least enough of one to keep us occupied until the inevitable. I always said inevitability was overrated, Leora replied, typing with renewed energy as she adjusted the frequencies. For a moment, Grafton found himself caught in the rhythm of her keystrokes, a steady cadence that seemed to synchronize with the station's hum. It was oddly comforting, like the universe's way of offering a lullaby to the damned. Then a thought struck him, a revelation wrapped in a cynical shrug. You know, he said slowly, if we keep messing with this, we might actually trick them into thinking we're planning something huge. Leora paused, her fingers hovering above the console as she considered his words. You mean make them think we have some grand master plan? Exactly, Grafton said, warming to the idea. We make them paranoid, start second-guessing every move we make. Maybe even convince them we're more trouble than we're worth. She raised an eyebrow, skepticism lacing her expression. And how do we do that without, you know, actually having a plan? Smoke and mirrors, Grafton replied, the spark of mischief in his eyes rivaling a supernova. We take advantage of the fact that they don't know how disorganized we really are. Turn our chaos into a strategic advantage. Make our stupidity look like genius, Leora summarized, a ghost of a smile breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. Exactly, Grafton said with a laugh. What could possibly go wrong? The idea was ludicrous, bordering on suicidal, but it was also the kind of madness that felt right. If they were going to go down, they might as well make the aliens work for it. With a renewed sense of purpose, they set to work, adjusting the frequencies, crafting signals designed to confuse and mislead, each transmission more convoluted than the last. They were like playwrights scripting a cosmic farce, turning their dire straits into a production worthy of the galaxy's most twisted theater. Think they'll buy it? Leora asked, a hint of genuine curiosity edging her voice. Grafton shrugged, tapping the radio with a thoughtful finger. Who knows? But if we can get them to believe we're more dangerous than we are, maybe they'll think twice before making a move. And if not, Leora prompted, ever the voice of pragmatism. Then we go out in a blaze of glory, Grafton said, his grin unabated. Better than drifting aimlessly until we run out of noodles. Their strategy, or lack thereof, hinged on the hope that the aliens were prone to the same paranoia and fear as humans, that they could be as easily rattled by the unknown. It was a gamble, but given the alternatives, it was one they were willing to take. Time passed in a blur of calculations and trial and error, the monotonous routine broken only by the occasional burst of static or flicker of lights. But beneath the surface, a tension simmered, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were dancing on the edge of disaster, their fate as uncertain as the stars outside. You know, Leora said, breaking the silence. "If this actually works, we might have to consider a career change. Maybe become professional con artists, space grifters," Grafton mused, chuckling at the thought. "Could be a step up from this gig. At least we'd be getting paid," Leora pointed out, her tone dry as the vacuum outside. "Assuming we live long enough to cash in," Grafton added, though the humor in his voice was tinged with a darker truth. The Iors wore on, each one a small eternity as they continued to fine-tune their signals, watching for any sign of reaction from the unseen enemy. It was a waiting game, a battle of wits and wills played out across the cold expanse of space. And as much as they joked and jibed, they both knew the stakes were deadly serious. Then, without warning, the console beeped, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the silence like a knife through butter. "What the hell?" Grafton said, leaning forward to peer at the screen. Leora's eyes widened as she scanned the data, her disbelief palpable. "Looks like they're retreating." "Really?" Grafton said, his voice a mix of incredulity and triumph. "We actually scared them off. Either that or they're pulling back to regroup," Leora replied, though her tone held a note of hope that hadn't been there before. "Guess they fell for our little charade," Grafton said, feeling the weight of their gamble lifting, if only slightly. "Maybe we're better actors than we thought. Or they're dumber than we gave them credit for," Leora countered, though the corners of her mouth twitched in a reluctant smile. For the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves a moment of cautious optimism. It wasn't victory, not by a long shot, but it was a reprieve, a chance to catch their breath and regroup. And in the harsh calculus of survival, that was worth more than all the noodles in the universe. "So what now?" Leora asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. "Now we keep them guessing," Grafton said, settling back with a new resolve. "We've got them on the defensive. Let's see how long we can keep it that way." They both knew it was a temporary measure at best, a delaying tactic in the grand scheme of things. But it was something, a foothold in a universe that seemed determined to grind them into dust. "Think we'll ever get back to Earth?" Leora asked, her voice soft, almost wistful. Grafton hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on him like a physical thing. "Depends on whether Earth remembers we're out here," he said at last, his tone equal parts hope and resignation. "Or cares," Leora added, with a cynicism that belied her youth. "Yeah," Grafton agreed, his smile bittersweet. "Or cares." For now they had their small victory, a fleeting triumph in a sea of uncertainty. They would cling to it, fight for it, and use it as a beacon in the dark. And perhaps, just perhaps, in the vast, uncaring void of space, that would be enough. The console flickered like a dying star, its feeble glow casting a ghostly pallor on Leora's face as she manipulated the controls with the deftness of a compulsive gambler on their last dollar. Grafton stood behind her, one hand kneading his perpetually sore shoulder, the other holding a grimace that could curdle milk. "Fancy lights," Grafton remarked, watching as the screen vomited lines of code that might have been ancient hieroglyphs for all he understood. "Our alien friends retreating, or are they just practicing the galactic hokey-pokey?" Leora's fingers danced on the console, a cynical smile playing on her lips. "Looks like they're pulling back. Maybe they've realized they're dealing with two of Earth's finest strategic minds," Grafton snorted, wincing as his shoulder twinged. "Or two random idiots who got lucky with a broken radio. Either way, I'm not complaining." The station creaked ominously above them, a sound like an old man's joints in the morning. Grafton shot a glance upward, as if expecting the metal to cave in under the weight of its own neglect. "Seriously, Leora, that noise is less comforting than a shark's hug." "Relax," she said, not looking up. "If it hasn't collapsed yet, it probably won't until after our next meal of rubber noodles. Glad to hear we're safe until we die of malnutrition." Their gallows humor was as much a part of their routine as the station's incessant malfunctions. It kept the specter of despair at bay, if only just. In the grand scheme of things, dying with a smile, or a grimace masquerading as one, was slightly preferable to dying with a whimper. "So, what's the next act in our interstellar circus?" Grafton asked, peering over her shoulder like a nosy neighbor. "We tweak the signals some more," Leora said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Keep them second-guessing until Earth decides to grace us with their attention. Assuming they even remember we exist," Grafton muttered, reaching for the ancient radio. Its static hissed like a cranky snake, a constant reminder that they were broadcasting into a sea of stars with nothing but hope and hubris. "Hey, they might not remember, but they surely will once the aliens start sending angry Yelp reviews." Leora chuckled, but there was a hardness in her eyes that belied the levity. They both knew that Earth's interest was as fickle as a politician's promises. Still, it was all they had. Grafton adjusted the dials with the precision of a surgeon, or a particularly fussy DJ at 3 in the morning. "Let's make them think we invented the universe's most effective bug zapper. Or the most annoying alarm clock," Leora added. The radio crackled, spat, and then settled into a rhythm of pings and beeps that sounded suspiciously like Morse code if you squinted with your ears. Leora's fingers were a blur across the console as she orchestrated their symphony of confusion. "Think they'll be back?" Grafton asked, unable to keep the tension from creeping into his voice despite his best efforts. "Depends on whether they enjoy banging their heads against a wall," Leora replied, her focus unbroken. "Or if they decide it's more fun to find softer targets." Their plan, such as it was, relied on the assumption that the aliens favored self-preservation over curiosity, an assumption that might just prove fatal. But the alternative was to sit quietly and wait for the end, and neither of them were particularly good at that. The station groaned again, a sound like a whale in distress. Grafton glanced at the ceiling, half expecting it to sag like an old tent. "I swear, this place is held together by duct tape and wishes." Leora's hands paused, her gaze drifting to meet his. More like expired glue and yesterday's prayers. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, sharing an unspoken understanding that this might be the last time they got to banter like this. Then Leora returned to her task, the illusion of safety briefly restored. Silence settled over them like an unwelcome guest as they focused on their work, each keystroke and dial twist an act of defiance against the universe's indifference. Time was a flexible concept in space, stretching and contracting like an elastic band on the verge of snapping. So when the console beeped its insistent alert, it took a moment for the sound to register. "Another signal?" Grafton asked, his voice a mix of hope and dread. Leora's eyes flicked over the data, her expression shifting from perplexed to cautiously optimistic. "Looks like Earth finally decided to pick up the phone." "Well, color me shocked," Grafton said, though his relief was palpable. "What are they saying?" "Hey guys, sorry about the radio silence, we were busy ordering pizza." Leora leaned closer to the screen, translating the bureaucratese into something approaching coherence. "They're mobilizing defenses. Seems our little light show caught their attention." "About time," Grafton muttered, though there was no missing the satisfaction in his voice. "Think they'll actually send us a rescue party?" "Maybe," she said, her voice tinged with something that might have been hope, if hope was a currency that is as rare as good intentions in politics, or at least some fresh supplies. "One can dream," Grafton replied, his grin genuine this time, "even if it's just more noodles." There was a pause, a moment of fragile triumph that they allowed themselves to savor. In the grand scheme of things it wasn't much, but it was enough. "So," Leora said, breaking the silence, "what's next in the grand strategy?" "Keep them guessing," Grafton said, echoing their earlier resolve. "Make them think twice about coming back. We've got Earth's attention now, let's see if we can keep it. And if the aliens return, then we'll improvise," Grafton replied with a shrug that spoke volumes, and perhaps a few swear words. Their banter was a thin veneer over the uncertainty that lay beneath, a way of coping with the knowledge that they were still far from safe. But for now they had hope, a fragile, flickering thing, but enough to light their way through the darkness. "Think we'll get medals for this?" Leora asked, her tone only half joking. Grafton chuckled, the sound rusty but genuine. If we do, they'll probably be made of tin and come with a side of pity. They shared a smile, the kind that spoke of shared battles and survival against all odds. The universe might not care, but they did. And sometimes that was enough. The station groaned again, a sound like a reluctant promise, and they both looked up, as if daring it to prove them wrong. "But seriously," Grafton said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "if we survive this, I'm putting in for hazard pay, or at least a vacation." "Somewhere nice?" Leora asked, arching an eyebrow. "Somewhere with gravity that doesn't try to kill you," he replied. "And maybe a beach. In space." "You're dreaming." "Hey, a guy can hope," Grafton said, his smile wry but unbowed. As they returned to their work, the station's hum providing a steady heartbeat beneath their conversation, they allowed themselves a moment of optimism. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in the vast, uncaring expanse of space, sometimes a start was all you needed. The station creaked one last time, a sound like a death rattle. Somewhere out there, Earth was supposedly mobilizing, and presumably someone was doing something useful. But here, drifting in a tin can of questionable integrity, Leora and Grafton were left to their customary blend of sarcasm and stars. "Well, I guess we made the universe's most reluctant heroes list," Grafton said, adjusting his grip on the ancient radio like it was a lifeline and not just another piece of junk. "It's a short list," Leora replied, her fingers tapping on the console with the kind of detached precision that suggested boredom as much as focus. "Probably just us and whoever invented instant noodles," Grafton snorted, the sound almost lost in the void. "No medals then, maybe a plaque. 'Congratulations, you didn't die today. Keep it up.' That's heartwarming," he said, ignoring the dull ache in his shoulder. He'd have to see about getting that fixed, assuming they ever saw a proper doctor again. The radio crackled to life, a voice barely audible over the static. "Deep Space Listening Post, this is Earth Command. Do you read?" Grafton blinked at the radio like it had just insulted his mother. "Well, fancy meeting you here," he muttered before thumbing the talk button. "This is the listening post. Took you long enough." "What, did you have to finish your coffee first?" There was a pause, presumably while someone on the other end decided how much sarcasm they could tolerate from a potentially dying man in space. "We apologize for the delay," came the eventual reply, the voice crisp with bureaucratic detachment. "We're sending a rescue team. Estimated arrival in 48 hours." 48 hours, Leora mouthed at him, eyebrows climbing high enough to crest her helmet. "We could be dead by then," Grafton shrugged. "Guess we'll just have to hold our breath." Leora returned to her console, muttering something about the virtues of patience and the lack thereof in modern spacefaring. She tapped a few more commands, the screen flickering like an old movie projector. "Hope they bring some decent food when they get here." "Don't hold your breath," Grafton replied, his eye caught by a new blip on the console. "What's that?" "Incoming transmission," Leora said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Another alien broadcast." "Great," Grafton said, leaning closer. "Just what we needed." More angry neighbors. The transmission was a jumble of unintelligible sounds, somewhere between whale song and a cow on a synthesizer. Leora adjusted the frequency, trying to decode the message. If this is their version of sorry for the inconvenience, they need to work on their PR. "Maybe they're finally realizing we're not worth the effort," Grafton said, his cynicism wearing its usual guise of humor. Leora nodded, though her eyes stayed on the screen. "Or they're prepping for round two." The station shuddered, a faint, unsettling tremor that suggested imminent collapse or, at the very least, a stern talking to from a structural engineer. "Was that supposed to happen?" Grafton asked, his voice laced with the faux calm of someone watching their house catch fire from the inside. "Probably just the station's way of saying I'm tired, get me a new life," Leora replied, her fingers flying across the console as systems rebooted with all the enthusiasm of a hungover teenager. "Well, if we're going out, we're doing it with a bang." Leora shot him a look, half warning, half amusement. "Don't tempt fate." Fate's got nothing on this place, Grafton said, tapping his sore shoulder absent-mindedly. And we've got bigger problems, like figuring out if Earth's rescue team comes with a decent mechanic. Their conversation was interrupted by another crackle from Earth Command. Rescue team en route. Maintain current position and avoid unnecessary broadcasts. Unnecessary broadcasts? You mean like our screams for help? Leora said, not bothering to hide her disdain. Grafton chuckled, pressing the talk button again. Copy that, Command. We're just hanging out, having a blast. The irony was not lost on either of them. Hanging out was exactly what they were doing, quite literally, as the lack of gravity made every movement a game of float and catch. Leora returned her attention to the console, monitoring the alien signals with a mix of suspicion and resolve. You think they'll actually leave us alone? Grafton shrugged. Maybe they'll get tired of us before we get tired of each other. That's optimistic. It's a new thing I'm trying, he said with a grin that was all teeth and no sincerity. The station creaked again, a metallic groan that sent a shiver up Grafton's spine, a reminder that optimism was just another word for ignoring the obvious. Still, they carried on in their weightless waltz, tending to their duties with the resigned competency of those who had long ago accepted the absurdity of their existence. Hey, Leora, Grafton said after a while, breaking the companionable silence. If we survive this, I'm thinking of writing a book. About what? The joys of space station maintenance. Nah, he replied, a sly grin spreading across his face. I was thinking more along the lines of how I survived the universe's worst airbomb. Leora laughed, a bright sound in the sterile air. I'd read that. Yeah. Maybe they'll even make a movie, Grafton said, feigning enthusiasm. You know, if they manage to find an actor willing to play me without bursting into tears. Or laughter, Leora added. Now that'd be a sight. They laughed, a shared moment of levity that softened the edges of their reality. Grafton took comfort in the banter. It was a lifeline, a tether to sanity in their drift through the void. So, Leora said, voice steady now, what do we do until help arrives? Same thing we've been doing, Grafton replied. Keep an eye on the console, keep the aliens at bay, and keep each other company. In that order, she teased. Hey, priorities are flexible, he said, winking. Gotta keep things interesting. And so they settled into their routine, a dance as old as their time on the station. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't much, but it was theirs. They had fought, they had survived, and now they waited. As the hours passed, Grafton found himself contemplating what came next. Assuming their rescue team arrived on time and in one piece, what would they do? Return to Earth, of course, but after that, would they be hailed as heroes or simply forgotten in the bureaucratic shuffle? He voiced the thought aloud, the question hanging in the air between them. Think anyone will remember us after this? Leora paused, considering. Maybe. Probably, at least until the next crisis. Fair enough, Grafton said, not entirely surprised. Guess we'll just have to make the most of our 15 minutes. And then some, Leora replied with a determined nod. Right, and then some. In the silence that followed, Grafton couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they had done something worthwhile. Not just for themselves, but for everyone back on Earth who had no idea what was out here. Hey, he said, breaking the silence once more. If we do get medals, think we should ask for a drink instead? Leora laughed, the sound echoing warmly in the confines of their small world. As long as it's not station brewed, I'm in. Deal, Grafton agreed, the promise of a drink, real or imagined, enough to keep the darkness at bay for a while longer. And so they floated, listening to the hum of the universe, their thoughts their own, yet shared in the way only two survivors could understand. They had faced the void and found each other, and that was enough. For now, anyway.